So imagine you are in Italy in the 15th century, minding your own business, painting masterpieces, rediscovering ancient wisdom as any Renaissance guy would, and suddenly, bam! Every major European power decides your backyard is the best place to stage a massive conflict. A conflict which will keep you busy for the next 6 decades. Welcome to the Italian Wars, where kings, popes and emperors all took turns fighting over the same patch of land, because apparently everyone wanted to prove the Renaissance was bigger. Now, before we dive deeper into the messy, chaotic and frankly fascinating Italian wars, let's talk about why the 15th century was such a wild, transformative time, and also why it's my favorite time in history. Picture this. Europe wasn't just busy stabbing each other with swords, it was undergoing a whole discovery phase, hence the name of this era being the Age of Discovery, and not just the old look new continents type of discovery. Sure, the Age of Discovery was kicking off with explorers like Columbus setting sail to accidentally bump into whole new landmasses. But discovery in 15th century Europe wasn't just about geography, it was multi-layered. The Renaissance, which had been a thing since early 1300s, was Europe's big cultural glow-up. Art, philosophy, science, you name it, it was getting a makeover. And while kings and mercenaries were busy redrawing borders, scholars and artists were busy redrawing minds. Italian figures were deep in the process of self-discovery, with humanism at the forefront. And humanism wasn't just some academic hobby. It was the cool new thing. These thinkers were diving into ancient texts, rediscovering classic literature like someone who finds their high school diary and realizes they peaked way earlier. Petrarch and his buddies were basically the original classic club, reminding everyone that ancient Greece and Rome were pretty much the gold standard of culture. Scholars were rediscovering what it meant to be human, what power really was, and why ancient Rome probably had better public bathhouses. But let's not forget that this Renaissance spirit of rebirth didn't just stay in fancy art studios or in the minds of scholars. Nope, it bled right into the battlefield, with the Italian Wars, where kings and popes went full WWE on the Italian peninsula, changing the fate of Italy forever. The Italian Wars were practically a Renaissance art piece in the form of military chaos. Kings were commissioning more armies than Michelangelo had frescoes. And everyone wanted a piece of Italy, because, well, Italy was basically the trending topic of the century, and it was the perfect place for long-time rivalries like that of the French kings and the Habsburgs to go crazy. Everyone had to be involved, and this whole discovery thing I went on ranting about was something that the whole Europe experienced. Some with the Renaissance, some with the quest for the new world, and others with wars that dragged their countries into a new form of existence. The best example of this being the 100 Years' War, and of course the Italian Wars. The 15th century was this whirlwind where nations were being shaped, borders were redrawn, and entire philosophies were shifting. No wonder it's such a personal favorite era. It's like watching Europe go through its awkward teenage years, but let's get back to the Italian Wars, and for that, let's set the stage. It's the late 1400s and Italy is basically the European equivalent of the hottest club in town. Everyone wants in. Why? Well, it's got culture, wealth and the perfect real estate right in the middle of trade routes. But it's also fragmented into a bunch of small city-states, like Venice, Milan, Florence and the Papal States. That's right, Italy wasn't even one big happy family. It was more like a dinner party where everyone's arguing over who gets the last piece of lasagna. Now let's introduce the major players. You've got King Charles VIII of France, who suddenly gets into his head that he has a claim to the Kingdom of Naples in southern Italy. And because he is a king and kings in the 15th century have a thing for large armies and oversized egos, he marches his troops right into Italy in 1494. But wait, why is Charles so obsessed with Naples? Well, because back in the day, Naples was technically part of a claim his ancestors had toyed with, and Charles, being young, ambitious, and probably a little bored, figured why not go get it back. But you couldn't just walk over to another country and conquer it, even if you had a claim and you were a king. That would piss off everyone, especially the very pious popes of this era, which we will get to in a second. So, what would you do? Well, if you were King Charles VIII, you had to tell everyone that this whole thing of invading Naples was to have a holdout near the Ottomans for future crusades, and this was exactly how Charles made his conquest feel justified. But let's leave Charles alone for a second to see how were other European powers reacting to his ambitions. On the other side, we have Ferdinand of Aragon, King of Spain, who wasn't about to let some French upstart stroll in and start playing house in southern Italy. Ferdinand had a claim on Naples too, thanks to his wife Isabella of Castile, who was always up for a dynastic power grab. So now we've got France and Spain squaring off over Italy, and they are just getting started. But the Italians themselves weren't just sitting around watching these foreign kings bicker. Oh no, the Italian city-states were also key players with their own ambitions and internal rivalries. The most prominent of them being Venice, Milan, Florence, and the Papal States. Now let's give a brief summary on each of these Italian states and their situations, starting with Venice, the wealthy maritime republic which controlled a significant portion of northern Italy and also a string of islands in the eastern Mediterranean. Its primary goal was to protect its lucrative trade routes, defend its Italian territories from encroaching European powers, and prevent the Ottomans from seizing its Mediterranean islands. Milan, on the other hand, was stuck in its own family drama, with the Sforza dynasty constantly switching sides to stay in power. And by that I mean Ludovico Sforza. This guy ousted his own nephew to become the Duke of Milan. Initially, he teamed up with the French, but then flipped sides to back the Holy Roman Emperor. In the end, the French had enough of his double-dealing and locked him up in a tower for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, Florence was undergoing its own Renaissance transformation, balancing being a cultural hub with maintaining political power. But the thing about the late 15th century Florence is that the city's political landscape is as messy as it can be. Just as the French king was invading Italy, the Florentines expelled the ruling Medici family, and the Dominic friar by the name of Girolamo Savonarola becomes the man in charge and supports Charles VIII. But Girolamo himself is later burned to death, and as you can see, Florence wasn't very stable at the time. And then there's the Papal States, ruled by the ever so dramatic Pope Alexander VI, also known as Rodrigo Borgia. If you thought anyone in this era was power hungry, the Borgias practically invented the term family business. Alexander was more focused on securing power for his son, Cesare Borgia, than on religious matters, turning the Papal States into yet another battlefield in this Italian free-for-all. Now back to our boy Charles VIII. In 1494, he marches his army down to Naples, seemingly unstoppable. But here's the thing, Charles's grand entrance into Italy wasn't exactly subtle. It was more like a bull in a china shop. The Italian city-states, initially caught off guard, quickly realized they've got a problem on their hands. They formed the League of Venice, a coalition led by Venice, the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, and eventually the Pope himself. Because nothing says we want peace like a multinational coalition of armies. Charles wins some battles, most notably at Fornovo, but his success is short-lived. By 1495, the French army is forced to retreat, licking its wounds and leaving Naples to the previous Neapolitan king who was supported by the Spanish. Charles returns to France, a little embarrassed, but still he is convinced that he can try again later. But unbeknownst to Charles, he doesn't, because he dies after hitting his head on a door frame while going to watch a game of royal tennis. That's unfortunate. And after the retreat of Charles, the first phase of the wars was basically over. But tension in Italy eventually led to the second phase of the wars. Now I'm going to make an attempt on getting you through the chaotic aftermath of Charles's death and the ascension of Louis XII to the French throne, and how would Louis' contribution to the war make our beloved Niccolò Machiavelli criticize him. And for that, we have to take a look at Florence. You see, as we discussed earlier, Florence was a mess at the start of the wars. And in the middle of all that, the peasants, whom were a part of the Florentine state since 1406, take a shot at regaining their independence, and it works. Other Italian states like Milan and Venice intervene by supporting the city of Pisa to oppose Florentine power. And this little conflict becomes another reason for foreign powers to come to Italy once more. Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, invites Maximilian I, the Holy Roman Emperor, to invade Italy and settle the affairs. Though Maximilian didn't flip Italy on his head and withdrew shortly after, this whole thing alarmed the French to invade Italy once more. And Louis XII decided to capture Milan and depose Ludovico once and for all, mainly because of Ludovico's invitation of the Holy Roman Emperor, who was the biggest rival of the French. In 1499, Louis invades Milan and captures it with little resistance. Now, before Louis had invaded Milan, he and Ferdinand of Aragon, which if you don't remember was the King of Spain and the main competitor of the French in Naples, signed a treaty which made Ferdinand kinda neutral in the upcoming wars that Louis had in mind. But here comes the reason Machiavelli criticized the French king. Our good King Louis in the year 1500 signed the Treaty of Granada with Ferdinand, which essentially divided Naples between the two monarchs, hoping to reduce tension in the region and get a large swath of land without a costly war. But if you remember the last time we checked out on Naples, it had its own kings which were nor French nor Spanish. But who cares about them? Eventually in 1501, French and Spanish forces under Louis XII and Ferdinand II captured Naples and partitioned it between themselves. And just like that, the Italian wars ended with a happy ending in which France and Spain ruled over their share of Italy in peace. Well, it doesn't take that long for Spain and France to go on each other's throats once again. And apparently the reason was that in the Treaty of Granada, some parts of Naples didn't get a clear ruler. And so the French and the Spanish went to war again to grab the mentioned provinces. I don't know what was this whole thing of finding a reason to fight each other, guys. Just do it. We know you love it. Now this act of the war is a short one, with the French getting absolutely wrecked at the Battle of Cerignola and Garigliano, thanks to the effective use of firearms by the Spanish forces under Gonzalo de Cordoba. These defeats made sure that the French would dump the idea of conquering Naples at least for a while. And just like that, Ferdinand of Aragon became the king of Naples and secured it for Spain. Now if you were thinking, with the French conquering Milan and the Spanish securing Naples, this war should end with both sides satisfied, then I have to introduce to you Pope Julius II, aka the Warrior Pope. Now, if this Warrior Pope thing doesn't concern you, I have to tell you that he took the name Julius as his papal name not in honor of Pope Julius I, but in emulation of the I came, I saw, I conquered guy, Julius Caesar himself. Forget the peaceful, meditative image of a pope, you know, sitting around reading theology and tending to the faithful. Julius was more of a give me a sword and watch me conquer Italy kind of guy. He decided that the Papal States were once again the center of the Italian universe, and that he was the one destined to unite them. And he also commissioned a lot of artworks from Raphael and Michelangelo. That's at least something to thank this guy for. Julius II started the War of the League of Cambrai in 1508, initially teaming up with France, Spain and the Holy Roman Empire to smack Venice around. Now why Venice, you ask? The flashy answer would be that the Venetians have been grinding this whole time that France and Spain were fighting for Naples, and so everyone thought let's go and turn off like a common fire the Venetians' insatiable greed and thirst for domination, as stated in the Treaty of Cambrai. But this was the flashy answer, and the real reason why the whole Europe went crazy on Venice might be because of the insatiable greed and the thirst for domination that Pope Julius II had, and the fact that he was from Genoa. But don't get too comfortable. Alliances in the Italian wars are like soup bubbles, fun to watch but don't last very long. Julius eventually turned on the French because after he saw how the Venetians got clapped at the Battle of Agnadello by the French, he felt bad for the poor Venetian souls and made a separate peace with Venice in 1510, while redirecting his cannon of insatiable greed and thirst for domination towards France, while allying with Venice. Oh my god, these Renaissance politics are harsh. And for the next 6 years, alliances shift crazy and the new French king, Francis I, who was young, brash, and freshly crowned, allies himself with the Venetians and defeats an army of Milanese and Swiss at the Battle of Marignano in 1550. He then went on to recapture Milan after it was lost to the Sforza family, whom were supported by the Swiss, thus ending the War of the League of Cambrai in a French victory. Now if you thought the French were starting to get lucky, think again. Here comes Charles V. You can think of him as the Renaissance equivalent of a final boss, who at this point was basically ruling over half of Europe and decided that it was time to knock Francis I down a peg or two. Now before we move on, let's take a moment to talk about Charles V, and to appreciate the sheer geopolitical nightmare that was his empire, often called the Habsburg ring. You see, Charles, who was the grandson of Ferdinand of Aragon, became the king of Spain in 1516. And in 1519 he was elected as the Holy Roman Emperor following the death of his other grandfather, Maximilian I. Now if you put all his territories together, you would find out that his European real estate would surround France on all sides, and since Charles was a Habsburg, there was no way he'd let a perfect opportunity to ruin the French as they pass him by. Thus, what followed was yet another dramatic showdown in this European, occasionally Italian war, with Francis and Charles in the lead roles. The French and the imperial forces met near Pavia in 1525, and despite all of Francis' bravado, he found himself outgunned, outmaneuvered, and eventually out of luck. The Spanish troops used gunpowder weapons with devastating effects, and Francis I ended up captured and shipped off to Madrid, where he was forced to sign an embarrassing peace treaty. But as soon as Francis was out, his council basically went, nope, that treaty is a no-go, arguing that deals made under pressure don't really stick. In the following years, Francis and some Italian states like Venice and the Papal States under Pope Clement VII unite against Charles, and it's now that one of the most ironic events in the Italian wars happens, the sack of Rome in 1527. Now, this wasn't just some random raid. This was Charles V's army, or more specifically his unpaid, mutinous and quiet Lutheran mercenaries, storming into Rome and looting the place like it was the Black Friday of Renaissance art. Pope Clement VII was holed up in Castel San Angelo, while the mercenaries looted churches, killed civilians, and caused absolute mayhem. The Renaissance wasn't exactly all peace, love, and culture after all. And once again, Francis fails to defeat Charles and sent his mother, Louise of Savoy, to negotiate with Charles's aunt, Margaret of Austria, giving the resulting treaty its fitting nickname, the Peace of Ladies. Now, in a shocking twist, Francis I, after getting his backside handed to him several times, decided that maybe it was time to get creative with his alliances. And here comes the French-Ottoman alliance, or the sacrilegious union of the Lily and the Crescent, one of the most bizarre partnerships in history. On one side, you've got the most Christian king of France, and on the other, you've got Suleiman the Magnificent, ruler of the Ottoman Empire. The two powers teamed up against their mutual enemy, Charles V, proving that the enemy of your enemy is apparently your new best friend. Francis sent troops to fight alongside the Ottomans, and in return the Ottomans provided naval support. But from 1530s, which this alliance was formed, till the end of the war, nothing really changed Habsburg dominance in Italy or even in Europe. Charles tightened his grip on his Italian lands, and in 1530 the imperial forces, with confirmation of Pope Clement VII, dissolved the Florentine Republic and installed the Medici as the Dukes of Florence. And so by the time we get to 1559, everyone is exhausted. Decades of war had drained the treasuries and the spirits of Europe's rulers, so the Treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis was signed, finally bringing an end to the Italian wars. France, defeated and humiliated, had to cede its claim in Italy to Spain. But the war's legacy was clear. Italy had become a battleground for European powers, and the dream of Italian unity would remain just that, a dream, whilst the Habsburgs dominated European politics. And that, my friends, is the wild roller coaster ride that was the Italian wars. A messy, decades-long game of tug-of-war over Italy, with kings, popes and emperors all trying to outdo each other. In the end, it left Italy more fragmented than before and set the stage for centuries of foreign domination. But if nothing else, it gave us plenty of drama, shifting alliances, and more double-crossing than your average spy novel. Hope you enjoyed this chaotic dive into Renaissance power struggles. If you did, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more historical videos, and maybe drop a comment on what war or historical figures you'd like to see covered next. History is filled with stories just as wild as this one, and believe me, we are just getting started. Thanks for watching, and until the next time, remember, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure loves to rhyme.